Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about cognitive behavioral therapy and behavioral therapy in general, which there are a lot of therapies that are considered to fall under this umbrella. And a lot of people didn't realize that there were multiple types of behavioral therapy or how they emerged or how they all sort of influence each other. So I think today's going to be really interesting. And this is the first of a few lectures like this where I'll be skimming over the main points of these different therapies. And hopefully this is a refresher for you since you've already taken a theories course. Hopefully, I can remind you of some of the things that you've forgotten or offer you with information you didn't have before. But this by no means is meant to function as an in depth training for any of these theories. I'm hoping just to pique your interest as you're working to identify your personal therapeutic practice and how the integration of multiple theories might look for you. If you're interested in adopting any of these, please seek out more information and training before jumping into practice with them. And as you watch this lecture, remember to add your thoughts, your comments below. And I specifically want to invite you to think about one or two of the theories that have sparked curiosity for you this week. Maybe it's a theory that you know about or have some previous experience with. In contrast, maybe it's one that's new to you or one that's difficult for you to even conceptualize. Use this time to provide your peers with at least two reference guides, resources, articles, or anything that might be relating to the theory or theories of your choosing. Additionally, explore how you envision these resources being helpful in guiding practical application of skills and techniques. In other words, how would you use this resource? What symptom, concern, or diagnosis might you be treating in drawing from that approach? Any specific population in mind? Any limitations? So, as far as the lecture today, we're going to cover cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, rational emotive behavioral therapy, solution focused brief therapy, and reality and choice theory. And these models are generally seen as essential tools in any mental health counselor's toolkit, offering structured, evidence based approaches to help clients navigate their challenges. Even if you don't see yourself practicing these fully, there will be times in your career where you might find benefit of leaning into the core tenets of some and then others. So, we're going to start with CBT today, but before that, let's talk about what CBT is not, which I feel like is important to address because sometimes behavioral therapies, especially CBT, get a bad rap. Cognitive behavioral therapy is not cold. A CBT therapist wants to develop a secure, safe relationship where the client feels empowered. We know that that's really important in any sort of therapeutic situation. So the CBT therapist isn't going to start barking orders like a drill sergeant or doing things for their clients or to their clients. CBT is not confrontational. When a person is talking, therapists are listening for what they might call a cognitive distortion. And if they hear what might be a cognitive distortion, they'll point that out, often with curiosity. And the goal is to build awareness. It's not meant to be a gotcha moment. But if the client disagrees and thinks that the therapist is off base, then they're the experts on themselves. So keep what's useful and leave the rest sort of approach. And CBT is not something that the therapist does to somebody. You're not going to go to CBT therapy and expect to work magic on your clients. CBT involves helping the clients. And in this, we identify the thought patterns, the cognitions, the behavioral reactions, and the emotions that are associated with those things, and figure out the helpfulness or unhelpfulness of those patterns. And ways to modify those patterns that will help the client move towards their goal of living a rich and meaningful life. Finally, CBT is not for everyone, and it's not for every diagnosis. If you are wanting something that is less directive, less goal oriented, and more feeling focused, then this is probably not for you. And you might want to lean a little bit more toward a humanistic therapy approach. And like I said, CBT is inappropriate for every diagnosis. Trauma is a perfect example. Yes, there are trauma informed versions of cognitive behavioral therapy, and trauma informed therapists can very effectively implement CBT to help people address trauma. But that's not necessarily the way that somebody might want to address their trauma. EMDR is very well suited, very effective alternative, best practice to addressing trauma. So people need to recognize that CBT is not the only way. And the other big thing you're going to need to know about CBT and trauma, specifically racial trauma, is that we cannot nor should we be in the position of coaching people to change their cognitions regarding events in which they were victims of racial trauma. Offering observation of cognitive distortions in these scenarios can actually be more harmful and re traumatizing, and generally, validation and affirmations are approaches that yield better results. Systemic racism and racial biases regularly leave African Americans and Indigenous people with disproportionately higher rates of depression. But when they walk into your office with logical feelings of anger and persecution, and you, as the therapist, downplay the role of racism and discrimination and how that plays into their emotional experience, perhaps by the suggestion that they reframe a situation or are using a cognitive distortion, they might get frustrated and you might diagnose them with an impulse control disorder or consider this to be aggressive behavior, which just perpetuates the oppression. So, if this is something that sounds interesting and meaningful to you, and you like the CBT approach, consider doing some research into decolonized CBT, which adds the social justice part into the mix as a much needed ingredient, which you'll generally find the rest of the behavioral therapies lacking. So, what is CBT? We just discussed what cognitive behavioral therapy is not. And what it is a method of addressing problems that recognizes the interactions between cognitions or your thoughts, behaviors, and ultimately your feelings. And I know feelings doesn't make it into the acronym, but that's really what we're talking about. So, when you have these thoughts, what urges does it cause? What behaviors does it trigger? What feelings does it trigger and why? When you have particular feelings, how does that affect your thoughts and your behaviors? And when you do particular things, when you engage in certain behaviors, how does that impact your mood and your thinking? So, for example, you do something you really enjoy, and it's probably going to make you feel happy and content. And this will alter your perceptions because you're going to be viewing the world through a safe, empowered, happy lens. If you've ever seen Legally Blonde, and spoiler alert, the whole defense at the end is happy people don't kill people. And that's along the lines of what I'm talking about. Thoughts impact emotion, which impacts behavior. So it's like this chain reaction. And as a therapist, you attend to all the stops along the chain. And in addition to the connections between and the patterns that emerge from repetition of these chains. So CBT, which was originally developed by Aaron Beck in the 1960s, Beck created CBT as a short-term, present-oriented therapy initially aimed at treating depression. So Beck, you might remember Beck from the Beck Anxiety Inventory, Beck Depression Inventory. It's the same Beck. What makes CBT particularly powerful is its structured approach. So structured that it's often manualized, meaning that there's a specific format or script that you would often follow with clients. And it's designed to help clients understand the links between their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors, and use this understanding to modify unhelpful patterns. And it asserts that all behavior is learned. So if it's learned, it can be unlearned or learned in a new way. And this is where Pavlov's dog from Psych 101 comes in. But CBT is built on a strong therapeutic rapport where the relationship between the therapist and the client is collaborative. It's goal oriented, problem focused, and time limited, making it a highly effective method for a range of psychological issues. There have also been a ton of studies regarding this to show the effectiveness of it. So, the first thing that I want to talk about is the difference between skills and methods, or techniques and methods. And cognitive behavioral therapy has many, many different skills in order to begin to address thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. And these skills alone are not the methods. So, think of skills like the tools in your toolbox, and that's great, but you have to know how to apply those tools in order to make any progress. You have to know how to use those tools in order to build, like, an IKEA dining room table, for example. So, it's important to recognize that there's a difference between having the tools and knowing how to use the tools. And there's a lot of people out there that use a variety of skills that might be attributed to dialectical behavior therapy or acceptance and commitment therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. However, they're not implementing the method. So, knowing the difference between seeing a therapist who helps you learn DBT skills and seeing a therapist who uses DBT or CBT method in treatment, those are very different things. And this is very much worth considering if you're considering this eclectic or integrated approach that we keep coming back to. Are you going to integrate skills into maybe a humanistic method, or are you going to use a behavioral method with maybe, say, expressive therapies skills integrated in? So while the ingredients don't really seem that different, the outcome can really be quite dissimilar. So, the first one that I want to talk about is cognitive restructuring. And this involves recognizing and stopping self defeating thoughts and substituting them with more positive, self enhancing thoughts. So, clients often use a thought log to track their negative thoughts, which helps them and their therapist analyze these thoughts and reframe them in a more positive light. So, if you've ever heard of positive affirmations, this is where this might play a role in here of, look in the mirror and say, "You're wonderful, you're amazing," 3 times every day. That's a way to switch those self defeating thoughts into self enhancing thoughts. The next one is reducing anxiety. So, techniques like deep breathing exercises and positive self talk are used to counter negative thoughts and cope with stress. Visualization and self rewarding strategies can also help clients maintain focus and motivation. Then there's creative problem solving. This technique encourages clients to explore areas of concern by identifying what needs improvement and generating potential solutions. It's a systematic approach that includes fact finding, problem finding, idea generation, and solution implementation. And then as far as alternative interpretation, that's a mouthful. Here, clients learn to suspend judgment until all information is gathered, which can help eliminate inaccurate first impressions and fosters a more balanced view of situations. CBT also incorporates a variety of other techniques, such as anti catastrophic reappraisals, self talk strategies, reframing, and staying with anxiety to help clients manage their thoughts and emotions more effectively. And because I talked about this one before, here's some examples of those cognitive distortions that I was talking about. And there's a lot of different lists out there about what these are and how to spot them. So I won't linger too long here, but just for example, fortune telling is a really fun one. So that's when somebody feels like they already know the outcome of an event that's going to happen in the future. Maybe they have some supporting evidence based on the past, maybe they don't. But think about it. Like if you see a post for a job that seems really interesting to you, but you start fortune telling and saying, "Yeah, I'm not going to get that one, so there's really no reason for me to apply to it." See how that cognition impacts the emotion? And there could be plenty of emotions in the mix here, like self doubt, worthlessness, shame, guilt, etc. And that impacts their action, or in this case, lack of action. So we might want to apply an alternative interpretation for this one and encourage a client to dig into the evidence that they have that would support their belief. Is this true? Is there a way to even change an emotion? Can we learn to insert courage or self worth or curiosity in there in addition to the negative stuff that's holding us back? Can we change the action? Now, the tricky thing here is that maybe you moved through this chain with the client and the client decided, "Hey, you know what? I'm going to apply anyway." And maybe they even interviewed really well. And then they just didn't get the job. This is where the behavioral stuff gets really tricky because what could happen is that not getting the job could reinforce the original fortune telling distortion, right? So we can work to reframe this as a learning opportunity. Do they know why they didn't get it? Work to improve in those areas, get some more experience, get more training, view it as an opportunity for growth rather than another piece of evidence that supports an irrational belief system that they're not good enough. Do you see where I'm going with this? So, are you aware of any cognitive distortions that you've come across in your practice? What do they look like in practice? And what have you done to help the client identify them and move around them? And then there's 14 tenets of good CBT. And some of this might sound familiar from what we've already been talking about of what CBT is and isn't. And I'm wondering if this might be a helpful little snapshot for you to keep in your back pocket as you start to compare, contrast all of these models. So CBT treatment plans are based on an ever-evolving cognitive conceptualization. CBT requires sound therapeutic relationship. It's continually monitoring client progress. It's culturally adapted and tailors treatment to the individual. It emphasizes the positive, it stresses collaboration and active participation. It's aspirational, values based, and goal oriented. CBT initially emphasizes the present. It's educative, it's time sensitive, sessions are structured, it uses guided discovery and teaches clients to respond to dysfunctional cognitions. CBT includes action plans or therapy homework, and CBT uses a variety of techniques to change thinking, mood, and behavior. So, now that you have a good idea of CBT, let's talk about the therapies that branch off of CBT. Some of these we'll talk about a little bit more today, and some we'll talk about later in the semester. Some we won't really talk about at all. So, do your research. What stands out for you? Go look more into that thing. So, cognitive therapy is one of the earliest therapies to be considered CBT. It focuses on identifying and changing the unhelpful or distorted thinking patterns commonly experienced by individuals suffering from depression. Cognitive therapy utilizes collaborative elements like agenda setting and homework assignments between sessions, and emphasizing the correction of cognitive distortions or thinking errors, as well as maladaptive behaviors. And then there's cognitive processing therapy, or CPT, and that's a 12-session manualized therapy approach and has been shown to be effective with those with PTSD. During therapy, people write an account of traumatic events, and through therapeutic exchanges with the therapist, they're able to identify which particular cognitive distortions may be present in their belief system. They learn how to challenge these thoughts, which are considered cognitive distortions, which, according to theorists, may exacerbate anxiety, shame, anger, and thereby lead clients to avoid reminders of the trauma. So these might be triggers. Cognitive processing therapy also involves psychoeducation about PTSD to better help therapy clients understand the nature of how PTSD symptoms develop and are maintained. And therapy clients learn about the influence of beliefs, certain kinds of thoughts, on emotions, as well as the role of avoidance in maintaining PTSD symptoms. So, with practice, therapy can learn to identify specific kinds of cognitive distortions like unrealistic appraisals and attributions, as well as unfounded assumptions. There's trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or TFCBT, and that addresses the mental health needs of children, adolescents, and families suffering from destructive effects of early trauma. And this treatment is particularly sensitive to the unique problems of youth with post traumatic stress and mood disorders resulting from sexual abuse, as well as physical abuse, violence, or grief. Because the client is usually a child, TFCBT often brings non offending parents or other caregivers into treatment and incorporates principles of family therapy. And then there's dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, and we will talk more about this one. And it was developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan and is heavily based on CBT with one exception. It highlights validating or accepting uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and behaviors instead of fighting them. So by accepting and coming to terms with discomfort, DBT encourages change through a mindful and present stance. So initially designed to treat individuals with borderline personality disorder, DBT is one of the most commonly utilized treatment interventions today, and anybody who frequently experiences extreme, unpredictable negative emotions can probably benefit from DBT. Motivational interviewing is one that we'll talk about later in the course. There's a lot going on with this, so it gets pretty much its own module, and it's an evidence-based approach that's directive and goal-directed. So motivational interviewing recognizes that people start therapy with varying levels of commitment and willingness to change. Motivational interviewing facilitates the internal motivation needed for behavioral change while resolving any existing ambivalence towards change. Although initially developed to help people overcome substance use problems, MI is now used to explore and enhance motivation for changing almost any behavior. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. You don't want to spell this one out. It's not ACT, it's ACT. They're pretty specific about that. And the central premise of ACT is that people's thoughts and feelings are affected by events, the people around them, and their environment. So more of a sociocultural approach. ACT focuses on increasing tolerance for emotional pain, especially when avoiding pain prevents one from living a fulfilling and meaningful life. ACT promotes alternative ways to cope with and relate to emotional pain while clarifying a person's values. Techniques from ACT help individuals get unstuck from their emotions so that they can pursue more value consistent actions. Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, REBT, again, we're going to talk about this one too. It involves identifying irrational beliefs, actively challenging these beliefs, and recognizing and changing maladaptive thought patterns. So, all of these might start to sound a little bit familiar. Albert Ellis created REBT based on the idea that each person holds a unique set of basic assumptions about themselves and the world, influencing their actions and reactions, and influencing their perspective on situations. Mindfulness based stress reduction utilizes the principles of mindfulness meditation to manage stress and related symptoms. Although it's primarily used in treating anxiety related disorders and chronic pain, those who don't have a diagnosis may find mindfulness based stress reduction beneficial as they can learn to manage stress much more effectively. Mindfulness based cognitive therapy is a relatively new form of CBT, and the essential element here is mindfulness. So the focus doesn't lie on changing thoughts like in other forms of CBT, but rather the way a person reacts to these thoughts. Research suggests that those who live with a significant amount of stress, anxiety, or chronic pain can benefit from mindfulness based cognitive therapy. And the goal is to help people make healthy choices with each new day and improve life on a moment to moment basis. And then you've probably heard of exposure therapy. It's a type of cognitive behavioral treatment most frequently used to treat OCD, PTSD, and phobias. Through treatment, a person and their therapist work together to identify anxiety triggers and learn relaxation techniques to manage anxiety induced stress. In a controlled, safe environment, the person would then confront those triggers while simultaneously implementing relaxation techniques. So, in just thinking about this list of connected therapies, let me know if you're seeing how they're connected, or maybe if you're not seeing so much how they're connected. Your book gives some really nice examples of skills and techniques for a lot of these. So, dig a little deeper into the ones that you're feeling connected to. That's covered in chapters 6, 7, and 8 in your text. And I don't think I assigned chapter 8, but the discussion sort of bleeds into that one a bit. So, if this is really interesting to you, you might want to also read that chapter. So we just laid the groundwork for CBT, so we're going to move on to the next branch off of that behavioral therapy into dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which, is the extension of CBT. So it was originally designed to treat chronically suicidal individuals, but has since been expanded to address a range of mental health issues and is really common now as a treatment for borderline personality disorder. And DBT emphasizes the balance between acceptance and change, two seemingly contradictory dichotomies or concepts that, when integrated, can help clients achieve a more stable emotional state. And this idea of holding two seemingly contradictory feelings is where the dialectical gets its name. So, the common thing that you might be exploring in DBT is the idea of this and that. It's not this or that, it's always this and that. I feel happy and I feel sad. I feel embarrassed and courageous. So we're doing a lot of ands with opposing forces, right? Star Wars isn't the dark side or the force. It's really about being able to hold both at the same time, isn't it? Or at least the good parts of Star Wars is about that. DBT is structured around 5 core functions. So, enhancing behavioral capabilities, DBT focuses on building and strengthening specific skills in clients, particularly in the areas of mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotional regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. And these skills are designed to help clients better manage their emotions and interactions with others. Improving motivation to change. Through individual therapy sessions, DBT helps clients address the barriers to change, such as emotional dysregulation and self destructive behaviors. The therapist works closely with the client to increase motivation and validating their experiences while also challenging maladaptive patterns. Generalizing skills across contexts, DBT emphasizes this as an important part of applying the skills learned in therapy to various aspects of the client's life. This generalization process ensures that clients can use their new skills in a real world situation, whether at home, work, or social settings, enhancing their overall functioning and resilience. And it's fairly common for a DBT therapist to remain on call for their clients at any given moment. So a client can say, "Hey, I'm experiencing X, Y, and Z in this situation, and the DBT therapist will say, hey, try this skill that we covered to help you with that. Structuring the therapeutic environment. The therapeutic environment in DBT is carefully structured to support the client's progress, and this includes clear agreements about therapy goals, regular sessions, and the balance of acceptance and change strategies. Group skills training, individual therapy, phone coaching, like I was saying, on call, they're all components that create a consistent and supportive environment for clients. And then finally, the fifth one is enhancing therapist capabilities. So DBT also focuses on the ongoing development of the therapist skills. Therapists receive regular consultation and training to ensure that they're equipped to handle the complex needs of their clients. This commitment to therapist support helps maintain the quality and effectiveness of the treatment. So, by integrating these five core functions, DBT provides a well rounded and structured approach to therapy that addresses both the client's needs and the therapist's capacity to provide effective care. And the structure not only helps clients develop new skills and motivations, but also ensures these skills are applicable in various contexts, fostering lasting change. DBT is built upon four fundamental pillars, which, from the foundations of its theoretical approach, and some might call these skills, but I've always heard them referred to as pillars. So the first one is mindfulness. This pillar focuses on teaching clients to be fully present in the moment, enhancing their awareness of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without judgment. Mindfulness practices help clients observe their experiences objectively, which is crucial for making conscious decisions rather than reacting impulsively. And it serves as the core skill in DBT, supporting all other aspects of the therapy. Distress tolerance involves developing the ability to tolerate and survive crises without resorting to harmful behaviors. And this pillar emphasizes accepting and finding meaning in distress rather than attempting to escape or avoid it or just, staying with the emotional response. Techniques such as distraction, self soothing, and radical acceptance are taught to help clients cope with difficult situations effectively. The third is emotional regulation. This pillar aims to help clients understand and manage their intense emotions. Emotion regulation skills focus on identifying and labeling emotions, focusing on emotional vulnerability, and increasing positive emotional experiences. By learning to regulate emotions, clients can decrease the frequency and intensity of emotional outbursts and improve their overall emotional well being. And the fourth pillar is interpersonal effectiveness. The interpersonal effectiveness pillar is about developing skills able to navigate relationships more effectively. This includes learning to assert needs, set boundaries, maintain self respect in relationships, while also balancing the needs of others. These skills help clients build and maintain healthier, more fulfilling relationships. And together, these four pillars provide a comprehensive framework for DBT addressing the key areas where individuals with emotional and behavioral dysregulation often struggle. By focusing on these pillars, DBT helps clients develop a balanced, well rounded approach to manage their lives and interactions. So, those are what we call the pillars. Next up is some key skills in DBT. So, mindfulness, like I was talking, a foundational skill in DBT of mindfulness involves focusing attention on present moment without judgment. This skill is critical for helping clients develop deeper awareness for their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So, this might involve skills like a body scan, grounding techniques, mindful breathing. Box breathing is really popular lately. And as far as distress tolerance skills, DBT teaches clients to strategize and tolerate and survive crises without making them worse. So, techniques like accepts and improve help clients navigate distressing situations by using distraction, self soothing, and relaxation techniques. And these are acronyms. So, if you really like acronyms, DBT is going to be for you. There are tons of acronyms. So, accepts outline strategies for distracting oneself from distressing emotions, giving them time to lessen in intensity or fade away, kind of like riding a wave. It might also be called something like urge surfing. But accept stands, the A is for activities. So engaging in activities that distract you from distressing thoughts or emotions, such as hobbies, exercise, or other useful coping skills. C is for contributing. doing something kind or helpful for somebody else. Helping others can shift your focus away from your own distress and provide a sense of purpose. The second C is for comparisons. So, comparing your current situation to a time when you coped successfully or to somebody who is worse off. And this can help you put your current distress into perspective. E is for emotions, engaging in activities that evoke different emotions, such as watching a funny movie or listening to uplifting music. Changing your emotional state can help you shift your perspective on the situation. P is for pushing away, temporarily putting aside distressing thoughts or emotions by mentally pushing them away. This could be useful when you're unable to address the situation immediately and need a break from intense emotions. T is for thoughts. So, redirecting your thoughts away from distressing topics by focusing on something neutral or positive. This can involve mindfulness techniques or visualization exercises, or maybe visualizing yourself in a safe place. S is for sensations, engaging in sensory experiences that are soothing or pleasurable, such as taking a warm bath, eating a popsicle, focusing on the cold, listening to calming music. Using aromatherapy is really popular too. And then emotion regulation skills are really helpful and important. They communicate information to us about our environment and our experience. And goals of emotional regulation include naming and understanding our own emotions, decreasing the frequency of unpleasant emotions, decreasing our vulnerability to emotions, and decreasing emotional suffering. And I find that the opposite action skill has been really helpful to keep in my toolbox, especially working with people with a history of addiction. So, the idea here is that all emotions activate us to respond, and the type of activation is biologically wired. The opposite action skill allows us to choose to respond opposite from what our biological response would activate us to do. They get us ready to act. So, some examples is like thirst. It tells us we need to hydrate, it activates us to drink water. Hunger tells us we need to give our body fuel, it activates us to eat. Fatigue tells us when we need to rest, it activates sleep. So, what about drug craving? It tells us we need to use drugs? Like, no, that's not. That's not it. That's where we might explore an opposite action. So, that one, unlike the other ones I listed, is not linked to survival. It might feel like it is, but it's not really. So, we'd look at switching it up. So, here's some examples of switching it up. So, anger gets us ready to attack, it activates us to attack or defend. So, the opposite action might be to show kindness or concern or just walk away. Shame gets us ready to hide. It activates us to isolate. So the opposite is to raise your head, give eye contact, and put your shoulders back. Get them out of your ears. Fear gets us ready to run or hide. It activates us to escape danger. Opposite action, move towards, stay involved, build courage. Do you see where I'm going here? It can be really helpful in this idea of emotion regulation to put a thought process in there of like, okay, what am I feeling right now? Is the action that's linked to this actually going to help me reach my goals? Probably not. What's the opposite? Let me try that instead. And then interpersonal effectiveness. So, goals of interpersonal effectiveness include getting people to meet your needs, getting them to do the things that you want them to do, getting others to take your opinions seriously. And the aim is to strengthen current relationships, build new and satisfying relationships, and end relationships that are unhealthy or toxic. And it's important to create balance and maintain balance in relationship and balance change with acceptance. So, Dear Man, DEARMAN, is really popular. And so let's just sort of focus on give instead because it's good, but I think it just doesn't get the spotlight as often as Dear Man does. So give is for be gentle, act interested, validate, use an easy manner. So be gentle means be nice and respectful, avoid attacks, verbal or physical, threats and manipulation, avoid harassment of any kind, express anger directly with words, avoid using threatening statements. For example, I'll kill myself if you dot dot dot. Describe painful consequences for not getting what you want, but describe them calmly and without exaggerating. Stay in the discussion even if it gets painful. Exit gracefully. Avoid judging, moralizing, blaming. Avoid smirking, eye rolling, sucking your teeth, or interpreting the other. So be gentle is actually really difficult to do. It takes a lot of practice. A it's not A, it's I, but it starts with an A. Act interested. Listen and appear interested in the other person. Listen to the other person's point of view. Face that person, maintain eye contact, look at your body language, lean toward that person rather than away. Don't interrupt them, don't talk over them, be sensitive to the person's wishes, and have the discussion at a later time if you're unable to do this. Be patient. V for validate. Show that you understand the person's feelings and thoughts about the situation. See the world from the other person's point of view, and then say or act on what you see. I realize that it's really hard for you, or I see that you're busy. Maybe we want to go to a private place when you're not busy anymore to have this discussion. You don't want to talk in public when a private setting might be more beneficial to the conversation. And then E is for use an easy manner. So use a little humor, smile, ease the person along, be lighthearted, sweet talk them, use a soft sell over a hard sell, be political, leave your attitude at the door. So you might see how that acronym can really be helpful with interpersonal effectiveness. And I see this working with all ages, all populations of people, all types of people who might need a little boost in the right direction of maybe how to have difficult conversations sometimes. And then radical acceptance. So this one involves fully accepting the present moment, even when it's painful. And this can help clients stop fighting reality and start working on ways to improve their situation. And it really falls under distress tolerance as a skill that's designed to keep pain from turning into suffering. But radical acceptance is usually talked about quite a bit in DBT and sometimes feels like it can be its own skill in and of itself. So, DBT is a comprehensive treatment approach that emphasizes a balance between acceptance and change, making it a powerful tool for helping individuals regain a sense of control over their lives. So, by integrating those four pillars mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness DBT equips clients with practical skills to manage their emotions, navigate relationships, and tolerate distressing situations without resorting to self destructive behaviors. And this framework is structured around those five core functions of enhancing behavioral capabilities, improving motivation to change, generalizing skills across contexts, structuring the therapeutic environment, and enhancing therapist capabilities. Together, these components create a structured and supportive environment where clients can develop skills and resilience needed to exert control over their thoughts, emotions, and actions, leading to a more balanced and fulfilling life. And just like CBT had some branches, I want to quickly introduce you to RODBT, which I find really interesting. And I was trained in years ago. But it takes the idea of DBT in getting people in control of their lives and flips it on its head a little bit. It came about as clinicians were discovering that DBT just really didn't work for a certain population of people. So RODBT is the DBT answer for those who don't benefit from DBT. So, radically open dialectical behavior therapy, or RODBT, is an adaptation of the traditional DBT approach. Developed by Dr. Thomas Lynch, RODBT specifically targets disorders characterized by excessive self control and over control, such as chronic depression, anorexia, obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So, this is the big difference that we look at first. It's the difference between the clients who are under controlled and those who are over controlled. Under controlled would be recommended for DBT to get skills to gain control. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, over controlled clients get referred to RODBT, where they learn to chill the F out. These individuals often exhibit rigidity, perfectionism, and an inability to relax or engage in spontaneous social behavior, which can lead to significant interpersonal difficulties and emotional isolation. So these clients don't benefit from DBT because they already have those necessary skills. They know the things. They use the skills maybe too much. They don't need more acronyms in their life. They need less rules and guidelines to follow. And I think the reason why I like this one so much is because I'm one of those over controlled people. RODBT makes a ton of sense for me. So it was developed really just to focus on enhancing that social connectedness and encouraging psychological flexibility. So these are new terms in the DBT world here. So while it shares some of those foundational elements with traditional DBT, RODBT introduces those new concepts and strategies tailored to individuals who experience extreme self-control. And I added a little assessment tool on the side of the slide. And I know it's a little hard to see. Hopefully you can zoom in, but there's a pair of words on each line. And the idea is for the client to pick between each pair. So one word out of each pair that best describes them. And some are really tricky and they aren't all necessarily opposites of each other. It can be really interesting as a self awareness building exercise. But the idea is if most of their answers land on the right side, maybe they're a little over controlled. So for me, so far, I'm deliberate, practical, prudent, usually quiet, realistic. So already I'm mostly on the right. So, the key defining principles of RODBT. So, it starts with this radical openness, which involves being open to experiencing emotions, thoughts, and behaviors that may feel uncomfortable or uncertain. This openness is essential for fostering genuine social connections and breaking down the barriers created by over control. RODBT places a strong emphasis on social signaling, which refers to the nonverbal cues and behaviors that communicate emotional states with intentions to others. So, individuals with high levels of over control often struggle with social signaling, leading to miscommunication and often isolation. RODBT teaches clients how to enhance their social signaling to build more authentic and rewarding relationships. And I think the most basic skill here is playing a game of eyebrow raising. And I challenge you to go do this out in the wild after you listen to this. So, what you're going to do is look at someone, make eye contact, and raise your eyebrows deliberately. Likely, they will also raise their eyebrows. And it's this sweet little mirror neuron signal that indicates to our brains that we see you, we hear you, we're here with you. And generally, we do this subconsciously, right? Like we're really locked into a conversation and we'll probably be doing some eyebrow raises without even thinking of it. But maybe somebody who's over controlled won't be doing that so much. And then they don't get that echo mirror neuron firing from the other person. They could be in a room full of people and feel alone because they're not making those social connections. But I bet if you raise your eyebrows to some random guy sitting at the bar next to you, you're going to get some sort of reaction out of him rather than if you just looked at him, right? So now, is it the kind of reaction we really want, or is it something that's going to meet our needs? I don't know. But maybe don't do your homework practicing this at a bar, do it at a grocery store or with your partner. Just see what happens. The next one here is that flexible mindset. So, a key goal of RODBT is to help clients develop a more flexible mindset where they can balance the need for control with the need for openness and adaptability. And this involves learning to tolerate uncertainty, take calculated risks in social situations, and embrace imperfection. Self inquiry, I can't say this anymore. RODBT encourages clients to engage in self inquiry, and it's a process of reflecting on their own behaviors, thoughts, and beliefs and feelings with curiosity rather than with judgment. And this practice helps individuals become more aware of their automatic responses and opens the door to change. And this is really interesting. The point here is to help clients find their edge or their personal unknown, the place where they have something to learn. Through taking clients to their edge, self inquiry helps us to understand experiences in new ways, develop new behaviors, fill in blind spots. So maybe think of it like growth edges. And then the fifth one here is mindful awareness. So, similar to traditional DBT, RODBT incorporates mindfulness, but with this unique twist. Mindful awareness in RODBT is not just about being in the present, in the moment, but it's also about being open to new information and experiences that challenge existing belief patterns and behaviors. So, this quote seems to fit really nicely here. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So, to conclude, RODBT represents this important evolution of DBT, offering a specialized approach for individuals who struggle with over control. So, by promoting radical openness, enhancing social signaling, and encouraging flexibility, RODBT helps clients move towards a more balanced and connected way of living. And this therapy is a valuable tool for mental health professionals working with populations who need to learn how to let go and engage more fully with life. So, acceptance and commitment therapy, like I was saying before, call it ACT, don't call it ACT, is a type of mindful therapy that helps clients to stay focused on the present moment and accept thoughts and feelings without judgment. So, it's a branch off of that cognitive behavioral analysis, but it's a little bit different than what we've been talking about, and even though it grew from the same foundation. So, as we talk about it, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see the connections. And now a lot of people think that ACT is this really new therapy, but the truth is that its conceptualization happened back in the late 1970s. So, ACT started a little bit differently. It started from a basic science model, an understanding of how behavior and language work. So, even kind of cognitive behavioral, so the way that we interact with our mind is in there a little bit still. So that was studied, and over the last few decades, it developed into a therapy. So I think of ACT as more of a framework or an approach to life and our experiences rather than just a collection of skills or exercises that we'll have a client do. And there are definitely those, and we'll get into some of them, but it's important to think about ACT as a lens through which that we can understand our client's experience and a way to help them understand their own experiences. So on a behavioral level, clients are asked to ask themselves how a behavior is serving them in the long term, in the short term. And in the long term, is it moving them towards a life that they want to live? In the short term, is it simply a way for them to escape or avoid or hide from something that's uncomfortable or difficult? And I really like this approach, but it doesn't feel as prescriptive as CBT or our EBT that we'll talk about in a bit. It's about building awareness and creating moments of intentional choice. So just because we're avoiding something doesn't make it good or bad or right or wrong, right? It's just, do we know when we're doing that thing and do we know why we're doing that thing? So the whole goal is to help clients move towards this life worth living, a life worth meaning, a life that has meaning, and like avoiding forever probably isn't going to achieve that goal, but avoiding for 20 minutes while our nervous system regulates might actually be pretty helpful. So, one of the core features of ACT is the radical acceptance of how we feel in the moment. So, it sounds a little bit like DBT there of radical acceptance and distress tolerance. So, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. However, you feel, it is what it is. And struggling with it, getting angry about being depressed, getting anxious about feeling anxious, thinking that you're never going to feel happy again or whatever it is, adding feelings, adding should statements, fighting against these feelings because we shouldn't feel a certain way, we start to turn up the volume and amplify distress. ACT encourages the client to be aware of what's important in their lives and regularly evaluate whether they're using their energy to move toward or away from things that are important to them. So, at its core, ACT works through increasing something called psychological flexibility. And psychological flexibility is learning how to come into full contact with our experiences, learning to be in the present, and be an observer of our patterns and what we want to do in our life so that we can live a meaningful life and take steps towards the things that really matter to us. And the intention here is to help the client focus on personal choice because with awareness comes choice. And as we build awareness, we're going to do that by being in full contact with our experiences. And psychological flexibility is based on these six core principles: acceptance, diffusion, present moment awareness, self as context, values, and committed action. So these six core principles of ACT. So we're going to move in the hexagon. We're going to start with the pink, and then we're going to move counterclockwise. So being present, mindful contact with the present moment. We just talked about that. Cognitive diffusion is separating self from feelings or experience. So I am not my anger. acceptance of what is, so not hiding from discomfort, committed action, or sometimes called purposeful action, so it's doing things that are important to you. And values identification is identifying what's important. And I might flip flop the order of this committed action and values identification because we have to know what we value first before we put that work in towards our value systems. But values is important here because oftentimes we try to avoid pain that we're experiencing in our life. We try to eliminate any pain in our life whatsoever, but that's impossible. Life involves pain. And if we care about things, it means that we have the ability to lose them, to be hurt by them, to be disappointed or let down by them. And so often when we're running away from that discomfort, we lose that committed action of moving towards our goals. We just end up running away from everything. And so while trying to escape the pain or trying to escape discomfort, we end up bringing more suffering into our life. And everybody's experienced this. Maybe it's as simple as not cleaning up your dishes immediately after cooking dinner. And now the food is like hardened and congealed on the pan. And it takes so much longer and so much more effort to like scrub all of that off. Or maybe you've just been procrastinating on a task and you put it off and you put it off and you put it off, and it seems overwhelming. It seems like too much. And now you get to the point where you're super close to the deadline and you don't have any wiggle room. You're feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed, and you still have to do the project. It didn't eliminate your pain or your discomfort, it just delayed it. And then it reached into the future, brought all of this discomfort and struggling and suffering, and it just piled it all on top. ACT helps us take a clear look at our life and our patterns and say, hey, is this working? What am I actually reacting to? And lastly, self as context or the observing self, the fly on the wall, just noticing your thoughts. Maybe asking yourself, what am I avoiding or trying not to come in contact with? And develop strategies and skills and an approach to sit with some of these things that are uncomfortable, to learn to maybe not be as reactive or afraid of them so that we can turn towards the life that we want to have, so that we can take small steps that in the long run, while our life might not be pain-free, it'll certainly be meaningful, which I think links us nicely back to being in the present. So we're not borrowing worry from the future. We're not living in the past. We're here observing what's happening internally, externally right now. And the cool thing is that movement along any of these can increase our psychological flexibility. So there may be some processes that your client might feel really strongly in, and others that they might feel very lost or disconnected from or unsure how to move forward. All of that's expected. And I think the quote, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf, beautifully encapsulates the core principles of ACT. So, acceptance. In ACT, acceptance involves embracing thoughts and feelings without trying to change, avoid, or fight them. And this is akin to recognizing the waves or the challenges will come and cannot always be controlled. Commitment. ACT encourages individuals to commit to their actions that align with their values, even in the face of discomfort. This is the learning to surf part, developing skills and resilience to move forward despite challenges. In ACT, the emphasis is on embracing life's challenges and difficult emotions rather than trying to eliminate or avoid them. Whereas the CBT and even REBT models look at those chains of cognition to emotion to behavior to help stop distressing events. ACT recognizes that distress is part of life. Distracting oneself from distress is akin to constantly running away from one's shadow. In the attempt to control the negative thoughts and feelings, one is at a loss for control in other life situations. So, symptom reduction is not a goal of ACT. Attempting to get rid of symptoms actually creates more distress. So, we haven't talked about Gestalt theory yet, but I think ACT seems to align a bit more with Gestalt than it does to its behavioral cousins in this way of being non pathologizing and the concept of paradoxical change, not focused on necessarily changing circumstances, but rather building awareness about self and circumstances with options for choice. So, moving on to rational emotive behavioral therapy, this was pioneered by Albert Ellis. REBT is built on the idea that our emotional responses are largely shaped by our beliefs, which are irrational. By challenging and changing these beliefs, clients can reduce their emotional distress and develop healthier ways of thinking. So, really, not that different from the CBT concept. It's seen as an action oriented approach to managing cognitive, emotional, and behavioral disturbances. The key here is to maybe remember that the difference is that REBT was actually the first and laid the precursor for CBT. So, in the timeline of events, CBT is newer than REBT, and the rational is also a keyword to pay attention to, that difference between rational and irrational belief systems, which you can have your own opinions on the language. I personally don't love it. I feel like it feels a little condescending, like it's the client's job to prove to me that their thoughts are rational, or as the therapist, I have the ultimate say if a thought process is rational or irrational. And you can see that CBT took that idea and grew with it in its own way. But anyway, REBT defines rational thoughts as true and rooted in evidence, rooted as desires, hopes, or wishes, results in moderate emotions, and conducive to goal attainment. Irrational thoughts are not true or rooted in evidence, interpersonal demands, shoulds versus wishes or preferences. So there's an emphasis on irrational beliefs related to what the text referred to as shoulds, musts, oughts, and it promotes disturbed emotions. So it's also not conducive to goal attainment. So the thing that I always say to clients that sort of connects here is the idea that we want to try to run towards something instead of away from something else. Chase the hopes, the desires, the wishes. If our lives are spent hiding from fears or those uncomfortable emotions, we'll never grow and we'll never get our needs met. So, some key principles of REBT: responsibility over emotions. So, clients learn that they're responsible for their own emotional and behavioral responses. Nobody made you feel angry, you feel angry. Nobody made you do this thing that you didn't want to do. You chose to do the thing you didn't want to do. Also, challenging harmful emotions. By disputing irrational beliefs, clients can learn to adopt more realistic worldviews. And then deep acceptance of self. Through REBT, clients are encouraged to accept themselves as they are, flaws and all. And some other tenets of REBT include that you don't need to be accepted to be desirable. It de emphasizes childhood experiences. The client is in distress because they still believe self defeating perceptions. There's this idea of musts that are the root of all human suffering. So people suffer because they have unrealistic expectations of self, unrealistic expectations of others, unrealistic expectations of situations or circumstances. And this concept of to be human is to be flawed. So I'm wondering what you think of these principles and tenets. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see your practice as something that might be able to move into REBT, or is there something here that you're not quite clicking with? So, some techniques in REBT. When people use REBT, they go through this specific technique, and it's a skill called the ABCDE paradigm, also known as chain analysis. So, A stands for activating event. What happened? B stands for my belief in reaction to the response or to that event. C stands for consequences. So this happened. I got cut off in traffic. What was the consequence? I got really upset. Okay, well, how did I get from A to C? What happened in the meantime? The belief is that there are a litany of automatic thoughts that we have based on our prior experiences that guide our reactions to the event. So you might think to yourself, that person has no respect for me, or that person could have killed me, or whatever triggered your sense of threat that led to that feeling of anger or anxiety. D stands for dispute and restructure beliefs that are irrational based on the facts and the context. So you're going to go back over those beliefs. They're not all inaccurate. Some of them might be spot on. Maybe they did literally run you off the road and put your life in danger. Okay, well, you're not going to change that one. But what you're going to play with is restructuring that belief about the person maybe had no respect for you. You would ask, how do you know? How do you know what they thought? What are some alternative explanations for why they may have done that to you, why they might have cut you off? Maybe you were in their blind spot. Maybe they were rushing to the hospital. Maybe they really needed to get home quickly, or they might have a accident in the car. You know, I think most people have probably felt that feeling at some point in their lives. So we might want to try to build a little empathy here. But there's a world of infinite possibilities, and there is no way to know whether or not our belief systems are accurate. So they're not supposed to be doing that. They're not supposed to be cutting people off in the traffic. And that is often seen as disrespectful, but it didn't have anything to do with you. So E is for evaluating consequences, your behavioral and emotional reactions to determine the effectiveness and alternatives. So let's say I got cut off in traffic and yeah, it was really a near miss. It scared the snot out of me. All right, that's a legit reaction. What is effective of me continuing to stay angry about it, continuing to be fearful about driving for the rest of the day? Or what I see a lot with my husband, not to call anyone out, but he's not ever going to watch this. And if he does, hey, babe, love you. But anyway, he gets cut off, believes he's disrespected, becomes angry, then starts yelling, flipping people off. Maybe he'll get out of his car and start something. It's a real bad look, especially when at the root of it is a feeling of disrespect, because now who is disrespecting who or whom? So the effectiveness of that behavior is not really going to win you a medal in the Karma Olympics. It might win a seat in the back of a police cruiser, though, and I suppose it all sort of depends on your goal. But ideally, we want to look at what are the alternatives to this. We can stay angry, we can stay fearful, we can start a fight. This is great. We would just want to spitball ideas and make a list here. We could tailgate them, we could cut them off, we could speed past them real fast so they know whose car goes faster. Right? I don't even know the rationale behind that one. We could honk. We could do passive aggressive wave. The effectiveness of that is all likely 0 to none, because if it's true that the person is disrespecting you, then they're not going to give two cares about your dumb behavior. So again, what's the goal? If the goal is to get to your destination quickly and safely, then we might likely want to explore ignoring them, putting on some music we really like, shifting that energy into something useful. Maybe use that energy to be more on guard, thinking, hey, I'm driving during rush hour and there are a lot of stupid people that are distracted right now. So I need to be more on my game to protect myself from all of those people who are distracted. And again, marriage is great. Opposites really do attract, because when that stuff happens to me, I hardly ever even notice because I'm too busy writing lectures in my head or thinking about TikTok dance moves or planning dinner. And when I do notice, maybe it's because of the work I do, or maybe I do the work because of this. But when it does happen, my first thought is, wow, they are in such a hurry. I hope that wherever they're going, they get there safely. I should maybe give them some room. So you see, we have very different automatic thoughts and automatic belief systems, not necessarily right or wrong, but they guide us to very different feeling states and actions and consequences in our lives. And I think that, we really balance each other out. So as far as skills, the ABCDE paradigm, we just talked about this one. And like I said, you might also hear it referred to as chain analysis. Sometimes when I do this with clients, just to move out of the analytical, I might ask them to build paper chains, to write the letter A on a link, to write their B on another, their C on another. And maybe there's even multiple consequences and all of the possible alternatives on separate links. And in groups doing this, I'd see who can make the longest chain. Or maybe we'd all work together on one chain if a client was having a really hard time seeing consequences or alternatives. Another skill is direct questioning and cognitive problem solving. These techniques involve exploring clients' thought processes and helping them find more rational ways of thinking. So think like Socratic method here, right? Because we're looking at irrational beliefs, so we want to use a rational approach to questioning. And then reality therapy, often associated with REBT, reality therapy emphasizes choice and responsibility, encouraging clients to take control of their actions and behaviors to meet their needs. And we're going to talk about that one next. So, reality therapy developed by Dr. William Glasser is rooted in choice theory, which hypothesizes that all behavior is purposeful and aimed at fulfilling basic human needs. And these needs include love and belonging, power, freedom, fun, and survival. And the central tenet of reality therapy is that individuals are responsible for their behavior and can choose to make changes that lead a more fulfilling life. Key concepts here are choice theory. So, this theory underpins reality theory, suggesting that we always have a choice in how we respond to situations, and our behavior is driven by our attempts to meet our basic needs. Behavioral focus. Reality therapy is considered a behavioral therapy because it emphasizes changing current behavior to solve problems and improve relationships. It does not dwell on the past, but focuses on present actions and future goals. Reality therapy is a descendant of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it shares the emphasis on the connection between thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. However, reality therapy goes a step further by focusing more explicitly on choice and responsibility. And I've seen this one work really well for adolescents, specifically adolescent girls, in the sense of allowing for empowering and encouraging autonomy, which we know leads to a feeling of self efficacy. But it really looks at, listen, here's your choices. What are some additional choices you can come up with? Here's the consequences, positive and negative, to these choices. And here's how all of these choices get you closer or further from your goal. The choice is yours. I will still be here to support you regardless of what choice you make. So, the process of reality therapy looks like establishing a relationship. That counselor builds a relationship that's trusting with the client, creating a safe space for open dialogue. We want to identify wants and needs. The client is guided to explore what they truly want and how their current behavior aligns or misaligns with those desires. And then together, the counselor and the client assess whether the client's actions are helping them to meet the needs or are leading away from problems. So that's evaluating behavior. And then the counselor helps the client develop a realistic and actionable plan for changing their behavior, focusing on what they can control. So, the role of perception. Reality therapy requires the client to have the willingness to change perception as long as the counselor can effectively explain maladaptive choices to the client. So, the shift in perception is crucial for the client to see the value in adopting new, more adaptive behaviors. But here's the thing, if the counselor can't explain why a behavior is maladaptive to the client, then the client's off the hook, right? So, an example is this. I just met with this 17-year-old who is coming in for a court ordered assessment about his marijuana use. He has two charges related to underage possession and some additional ones that came about because of just dumb behaviors while he was intoxicated. And we go through this assessment, and this whole time he's talking about how he does not have a problem with marijuana. Legal involvement was just bad luck. And he's got some relationship distress with his girlfriend. She doesn't like that he smokes all the time. And I'm like, wow, it looks like you've got a lot of consequences related to your substance use. He disagrees. He doesn't see it that way at all. Ultimately, he opts not to engage in treatment to look at his substance use. And that's his choice, right? I recommended it. I really made it my case to him. He struggled with identity. He doesn't have a clearly defined goal. He's graduating high school, and does he go to college? What does he study? He doesn't know. He has almost zero social support. He has a lack of hobbies. He has a lack of coping skills other than smoking. He's got this legal involvement. His girlfriend's leaving him. To me, it was obvious that he was engaging in maladaptive behavior. To him, it wasn't. And I missed the mark somewhere in there of leading this horse to water. And reality therapy says that's on me. That's not on him. I wasn't able to effectively explain how his choices were maladaptive. The question isn't whether they are or aren't maladaptive. The question is if he sees that they are. So he didn't know that he didn't know what his problem was, but he was sure it wasn't the weed. The weed was the solution. Okay, cool. Nice to meet you. If you change your mind, give me a call. And I referred him to a different kind of therapist that wouldn't bug him about quitting smoking. So the conclusion here is that reality therapy empowers clients to take control of their lives by making conscious choices that lead to positive outcomes. Its focus is on present behavior, personal responsibility, and the willingness to change. And it makes it a powerful approach within the broader behavioral therapy and CBT frameworks. So by understanding choice theory, clients can navigate their lives with greater purpose and satisfaction. And this is the last one today. And I know this is a long one, but the last one we're talking about is solution focused brief therapy, which hopefully I'll be able to explore very briefly with you. But it typically unfolds in 6 stages. So, first, we define the problem. The therapist and the client work together to clearly identify the issue at hand. We're going to communicate expectancy of change. So, Joe, you're here to look at solutions about the drinking. Let's make sure we decrease our drinking while we're in therapy. Can you agree to that? You might also reframe the problem situation as normal and modifiable. So, normalizing social anxiety, asking the client to describe it more. We're going to establish treatment goals. Critical questions are asked to help set clear, achievable goals. So, examples might be, what will be the first signs that things are moving in the right direction? Or what do you need to make this happen more? What do you need to see this goal developing? Interventions are tailored to reframe the problem in a positive light to motivate the client to act differently. Utilization of whatever will motivate the client to act differently and using strategic task assignment to have the client do something different between sessions. So there's homework in this model, and it might look something like, hey, I hear you have a social event coming up. Why don't you give one of your other coping skills a try and see if you can get through the night without a drink? What's a reward that you can think of that would feel a nice way to celebrate if you're able to do this? Delivering strategic tasks, the therapist and the client work collaboratively to identify the tasks. The client writes the task down, and the idea here is to encourage autonomy, ownership of the process, and new behaviors. So we want to give them the tools that they can carry with them even after this brief therapy is over. Emphasizing positive behavior. So, positive change is reinforced through questions that highlight the client's successes, enhanced by questions that encourage positive change and solutions. So, a question might be, what is happening that you would like to continue to happen? And finally, termination. The client recognizes that their progress and initiates the end of therapy. They are totally in control here. They have full control over the pacing and over the goals and over the process of termination. And some techniques and tools here. One of the most common and one of my favorites is the miracle question. So it's one of the hallmarks of SFBT, and uh, it invites clients to imagine a future where their problem is solved. This question helps clients articulate their goals and visualize a positive outcome, making the abstract more concrete. So, an example might be, suppose tonight while you were sleeping, a miracle happened and your problem was solved. When you woke up, how would you know? What would be different? Or I like the, if I handed you a magic wand right now and you waved it and this problem just vanished, how would your life be different? What would you notice right now, right here, sitting in this room with me that wasn't there anymore? And this can actually be a really difficult question to answer sometimes. As I'm more rooted in the Gestalt lens, I love that it shifts the person back to thinking a little bit more in the present moment and noticing how these big life stressors don't actually often impact us every second of every day of all of our lives. Like the story we tell ourselves, it's not true. So, right now, life is actually kind of okay. And sometimes the miracle of it, recognizing that this problem either has a solution or isn't that bad. And then, as far as scaling questions, these are used to help clients assess their progress, confidence, or readiness for change. And it involves asking clients to rate something on a scale from 1 to 10. So, the example is, on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you that you can attend the social event without drinking? What would make it a 7 instead of a 5? And those who are familiar with motivational interviewing might also recognize this as something that sounds a lot like the readiness ruler. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to make a change right now? So, same concept, different title. And I really do like using the scaling regarding symptoms too. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the absolute worst, how bad is your anxiety on any given day? If it's social anxiety, how bad is it in social settings? And this last one here is exception seeking questions. So these questions focus on times when the problem could have occurred but didn't, helping clients to recognize and build on those past successes. So an example is, can you think of a time in the last week when you felt anxious but didn't turn to alcohol? What was different about that time? And we already talked about that one a bit when I presented my client Joe a couple moments ago. The therapist role is something that's really important in SFBT, and it's not the expert on the client's life. Instead, the therapist is acting as a collaborator or facilitator, guiding the client to discover and harness their strengths and resources. And this aligns with the concept of the client being the expert in their own life. Solution focused brief therapy fits under the behavioral therapy umbrella because it shares that fundamental behavioral therapy focus on actionable change and goal oriented interventions. Like other behavioral approaches, SFBT emphasizes the importance of observable behaviors and practical solutions over diving into deep rooted psychological issues like attachment styles or childhood trauma. It encourages clients to identify specific goals and take concrete steps towards achieving them, much like traditional behavioral therapies that focus on modifying problematic behaviors. Additionally, it uses structured interventions such as strategic tasks and reinforcement of positive behavior, aligning with behavioral therapy's emphasis on systematic, evidence based techniques to promote change. This pragmatic, solution focused approach makes SFBT a natural fit with the broader category of behavioral therapies. So, to wrap up, today we covered 4 powerful therapeutic approaches. I think we covered 6 actually: CBT, DBT, SFBT, REBT, ACT. I feel like I'm missing one. Anyway, each of these models is slightly different, but the common denominator is that they focus on thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Cognitive behavioral therapy approaches tend to be more analytical and action oriented, seeking to help clients understand and address patterns and interactions in their life. These are all considered a top down approach. The cognitive behavioral therapist is curious and provides support and compassion. As we continue in this course, I encourage you to reflect on how these techniques can be integrated into your own practice to support your clients more effectively, or maybe reflect on why or when you wouldn't incorporate these for client work. When might a client benefit from something top down and analytical versus when would a client benefit from something bottom up and symbolic or metaphorical? And really, I think it comes back to how you answer this question of how and why do people change. If they learn through conditioning and need help with skill acquisition or need exposure to stimuli and help forming new habits, maybe they need some cognitive restructuring and modeling, then a cognitive behavioral approach seems like it would be for you. But if you're thinking it has a little bit more to do with self actualization, experiencing authenticity, emotional awareness and expression, searching for meaning, a need for congruence, desire for autonomy, or healing from past experiences, then what we talked about today might not really be a good fit for you. And maybe you want to look more into the humanistic theories. Or maybe it's both. It's that dialectical yes and language. If your answer is all of the above, then an intentional integrated approach might be the key. Until next time, thanks for hanging out with me today.